Hello. Get everyone at the sleepiest time of the day right after lunch. I'm Sam Bliss. I'm a PhD student at the University of Vermont. And this panel is about the complexity of transitioning to a more just and ecological world, or worlds, as it were. Our two speakers, Dr. Katie Kish, here with little Logan, and Mario Giampietro, who's joining virtually, who will be a face on a screen for us. They're both system scientists whose work brings attention to just how absurdly challenging it is for societies to address environmental and social predicaments like climate breakdown and the extinction of species. These are truly wicked problems. My own engagement with their work has come through these two scholars' critiques of some of the assumptions in the degrowth hypothesis, that societies will be able to transform toward justice, democracy, and a biophysically smaller economy at the same time. So I'm going to introduce each of them, and then they're each going to give about a 20-minute talk, and then we're going to have about 20 minutes at the end of discussion with audience-written questions that I'll read. So, Katie Kish is a postdoctoral researcher at McGill University with Economics for the Anthropocene, which is a pretty cool project. She's also the Vice President of Communications of the Canadian Society for Ecological Economics and a mother of two. She finished her doctorate last year at the University of Waterloo right here, and her dissertation was on ecological economic development goals. Katie's also studied maker communities, care work, these wicked tensions we're talking about in this panel, and recently she's been part of a project rethinking the ideas of freedom and liberty for the context of the Anthropocene and co-editing a book on that. She's also co-editing some special issues on a research agenda for our field, ecological economics, one in sustainability, another in ecological economics, and maybe another with Vijay on a radical agenda for ecological economics. Katie's a friend from whom I've learned a lot through collaborating and working out some of our little intellectual disagreements and coming to some interesting common ground. Mario Giampietro is a research professor at ICTA, the Institute for Environmental Sciences and Technology at the Autonomous University of Barcelona. He's created an innovative scientific approach for studying sustainability issues called multi-scale integrated analysis of societal and ecosystem metabolism, or MUSIASM. Like Katie's work, this is based in complex systems theory. It brings together biophysical and socioeconomic variables across different scales to link society's metabolism to that of the environment, which uncovers potential constraints or ecological problems. This work has produced over 100 peer-reviewed journal articles and tons of other publications, including 6 books. The MUSIASM framework has been applied to energy systems, food systems, and Mario and colleagues are currently carrying out integrated assessment of the nexus between energy, food, and water in relation to the Sustainable Development Goals. I was lucky enough to get to know some of Mario's brilliant grad students and colleagues in Barcelona. They're all ridiculously smart, which was abundantly clear both when I could understand what they were talking about and when I couldn't. And they really share a deep respect for Mario and his mind and his work. So both these talks are going to address the issues of complexity in relation a little bit, I think, to the Sustainable Development Goals. And Katie's going first, so I'll invite Katie Kish up to the stage.
It's okay. How do I just hit the green one? Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for that great introduction, Sam. I really appreciate it. I was just telling some friends outside, I just went for lunch with a friend, and I tried to order a glass of water without ice in it, and I asked for water without those cold ice blocks. So, I mean, being a mother, it seems to be blocking some of I'll blame it on that, right? So if I seem to forget a word, feel free to just shout it out at me, because that's what's happening. So this presentation is one that I've done a couple times for people, at least half of it, for some people that are already in the room. But it outlines what Sam was talking about. So here we go. At the last CanC, I had just finished up a special issue of Alternatives Journal all about ecological economics. And I had worked on that issue for months with the then editor. Her name was Leah Gerber. And in that time, we taught each other a lot. She taught me about how badly academics, including myself, could write for new audiences. And I taught her all about ecological economics theory. And when the issue was about less than a week away from being published, she said, I just have one more question for you. And I said, okay, what is it? And she said, what about my pineapples? And I absolutely loved this question, partially because I love it when people say slightly ridiculous things, but also because she was tapping into something that at that time, environmentalists were often forgetting to engage with. Now, many in this room do it all the time because it's like come up time and time again, but at the time it wasn't so much. And that question is, what do we potentially have to trade off to make this whole EE vision really work? Will we have to eat fewer pineapples? So shortly after, I was at a meeting between York and the Ecological Footprint Network, and Mathis was there, and he said something, this is not the exact phrase, but it was something to this effect, that as countries are meeting the Sustainable Development Goals, their ecological footprint is increasing beyond available biocapacity, and we have yet to see a country in the sweet spot. And so really he was saying we can't have our proverbial pineapples and sustainability too. But it's problematic because, of course, the SDGs aren't just pineapples and MacBooks and cell phones. They're education and women's rights and basic necessities of life, right? And there are some things that aren't necessarily represented in the SDGs that also come into question here that have been ushered alongside growth economics, and that's rights such as animal rights or disability rights, and some of our most cherished ideologies such as freedom, which is what I'm engaging with now, and feminism, which I really did in my PhD. So which SDGs and ideologies are tied up in growth and in the scale of our economy? If we scale back, what might we lose? Now, the first thing that people say when I bring this up is, well, why can't we just take all of the good stuff and leave behind all of the bad stuff? Why can't we pick and choose? And so I'm just going to do very quickly 3 reasons why that's sort of the case, or mostly the case. So the first one is, the things you can't think. This is a presentation I did yesterday that Dave Mallory and I are working on, saying that Dr. Seuss has essentially lied to generations of children because we're constrained by our cognitive and social realities. The way that we speak, live, and interact with each other, it's not random. It's tied up to institutions and structures of society. We need our institutions to uphold our ideologies, and we need our ideologies to rationalize our institutions, so they're mutually dependent. The second comes from systems theory, and that's that social complexity, ideology, and rights are entropically expensive because they require work and energy to uphold them. So for example, not all cultures in history have inherently had rights for disabled peoples. But now, more and more people get to live more comfortably than ever before in history, despite their disabilities, or because of them, because we have entire sections of the market devoted to goods and services to make their lives more comfortable. And that's a good thing, right? And not only that, but our liberal ideology that has grown alongside growth economics has told us that that individual matters a great deal, and that we should protect and make them comfortable regardless of the energetic and often the monetary cost. And the third reason, this is an image from, Sam and I just wrote a chapter together on this, and this is an image from that, it's cut off, that's okay. That in complex systems, the third argument is that picking at pieces doesn't always turn out so well, because there are hierarchies and subsystems, so systems are built over time, and the system that we have was built over a very long, not a very long period of time, really, in perspective anyway, but built on a complex history. And so if we want to pick away at some of the lower pieces of those pyramids, which a lot of us in this room want to do, because that's our economies, then we don't know what will happen to the top. There's a lot of uncertainty. So I'm not saying necessarily that it would fall apart, but there is a lot of uncertainty there. And when it comes to feminism and rights and ideologies and freedoms, I don't really want to play with uncertainty. I want to try and be a little bit more certain. And to some extent, we want to pick away at the pieces, and we want to let some of them crumble, right? And I'm sure we're all prepared to lose pineapples. Maybe Leah's not, but I'm prepared to lose pineapples, and maybe even new MacBooks. I use PC anyways. But how can we make sure that we keep women's emancipation and education? And my research group, Catherine came up here and did her flash talk, and I was when I was doing my PhD, I was part of her research group. We would call these all of the wicked tensions of the changes of growth. And they're wicked because we're not sure that they have much of an answer, but we try to answer them anyway. So all of that was pretty interesting, but I actually needed to get a PhD. So I tucked it all away, and I went and did some hands-on fieldwork. So as Sam mentioned, my research was on makers, and makers are people who make things. And tomorrow night, there's going to be a cool maker event, and we'll make lots of things. And I did a first bit of my research in Toronto and Kitchener and Waterloo, and that really convinced me that every municipality should be investing in makerspaces and maker culture. So I just wrote a paper for the Solutions Journal titled "The Revolution Will Be Handmade," which is actually something I came up with while talking to Sam, and I truly believe that. So I wanted to get a little bit of a different context. So after I did these cities, I went to PEI for a little while and interviewed makers there, and it was totally different. So the big first difference that shocked me was that out of all the people I interviewed, and there was, I think it was around 54, it was just under 60 people, only two of them were not women, so it was mostly women, and that was by no effort on my part. And to all of them, making wasn't just a small subset of their municipality that could support a new kind of production. It was integral to their entire informal economy. And they had created a whole world separate, in most ways, from the larger system. They were doing trade, they were doing bartering and gifting with one another. They would make their own goods and trade those for other goods or within the informal food system. And there was a great deal of participation in support systems for those within their communities. You would go into another maker's home, and you would see things that other makers had made for them if they had a baby, or you would see things that like cabinets made by local makers, and they were trading those. There was not a lot of monetary exchange. And so while I was there, some of the wicked tensions started to creep in. I started to see them a little bit in action. So this was a holistic and embedded economy with making as a central component that was removing itself from growth economics. And all of these women that were there, they had a very similar story. They had left their jobs, some of them from Toronto, and they moved to PEI for a bit of a slower life or whatever. Some already were in PEI, but they quit their jobs, almost always so that they could become the primary care worker in the home. And after that, they took up making because they had some extra time, or to contribute to the household financials, or in that trade system, right? And they were all completely dependent on their husbands, and so they were tied. They had this vulnerability because they were tied to their free, breadwinning partners, while at the same time contributing to what Virginia Held argued was more important in some ways, which was a deeper reality of human interdependency on which their familial and community relationships depended. But there wasn't a lot of recognition for that, right? A lot of their children were homeschooled. University was not the talk of the town. Usually taking over the alpaca farm or doing what their parents were doing was, more what they had thought they might do. Or if they were going to university, I went and saw some of their children. They were building boats, and they were learning how to do intricate woodworking. They were learning all sorts of different kinds of sort of more hands-on skills. There was no reliance or need for state-provided childcare. It was all at home, either because of cost or because it just makes sense to have your kids at home with you if you're there. They relied on multi-generational families. There was also incredible out-group antagonism. This one really surprised me because Canada is always, we're painted as being so friendly. But they had a lot of out-group antagonism. They talked a lot about not really liking tourists, but they need them to come because they like to sell their goods. So they kind of use the tourists, but they hope that they never stay. And many were against any kind of immigration that might significantly increase the population of the island. Now, I'm not saying that this is a typical opinion of an islander in PEI, right? But of these makers, it was a typical opinion. So it was a thriving, or maybe no or low growth economy, used all local goods and had limited emissions. They didn't travel. They were using what was available on their land around them, grew their own food, but women were almost entirely back into care roles. And that might not be a bad thing. We might be okay with women being back in care roles. I certainly love being in a care role. But what's not good is that they were judged by women off island for those decisions. They would talk about, one was scolded by her mother for not pushing her daughter into universities, or one was said she was wasting her potential by becoming a mother, something that was said to me very recently when I said I was going to leave academia to be a mom for a while. So even if we say that modern feminism is empowering that care work, it was not the case in this situation. Children were getting educated very differently and not thinking about university, certainly not in the way that the SDGs measure the indicators used for education. This would not increase those indicators. And then there was, of course, that out-group antagonism. So my presentation used to just stop there to say, okay, so there are these wicked dilemmas, and in a low-growth economic situation. They are popping up a little bit, and so that's something we really need to take seriously in EE. But I'm not really happy stopping there anymore. So in the last couple of years, this topic became quite popular among especially the students in this room in the E4A program and the L4E program. So Jen Goby and Dave Mallory are writing a paper about it for a special issue. Sam and I have a chapter on it coming up. Steve Quilley, who's around here, he has, I think, about 5 students that work on this now, on this question. And we really can't seem to stop talking about it. And it's understandable because, like just at this conference, we have made social justice and equity so important because we realize that it is important. So if that becomes undermined by anything, of course it's going to start occupying our mind, even in the slightest bit, right? So I decided if that's the case, and if some of these examples might be putting these into questions, then we need to come up with some solutions or new ways to engage with this question. And so this is what I've started to do in my role at McGill now, is to try and think about ways to engage with this tension. Because, I mean, I need to come up with some answers even just for my children's sake. There we go. So, some way forwards. The first one that I've been working on, is to revitalize the Sustainable Development Goals. If they don't fit what we need, then we need to change the indicators. So Steve and I just wrote a new book we didn't write a book, that would be ambitious. We wrote a chapter in a book called The Ecological Limits of the Sustainable Development Goals, and we put forward ecological economic goals instead. And we go through a couple and we say, here's what maybe indicators could have underneath these headings that might fall in line with a more ecological economic vision. So the SDG for women's equality, for example, the indicators might not improve when someone like me decides to leave academia or not be a CEO or not work anymore, and instead I go and I decide to just take care of my children, even though arguably, because I'm reducing our family's income by half, and so therefore we won't travel more, we won't consume as much, so arguably it's doing more for sustainability than it would if I was a CEO or an academic, depending on what my research was on and how influential it may have become. Now that it's a question, I don't have to worry about it, right? And same with education, so reskilling and provisioning. These sorts of things happen a lot in different kinds of educational settings or even in homeschool settings. And municipalities, when they take on, so Kitchener, for example, has a very, very thriving maker community here. That doesn't really, that wouldn't increase an indicator for how good Kitchener's educational programs are, right? Even though they are giving education that prepare people even better than traditional education for unpredictable futures. And then also the next step that I want to think about is that not just coming up with new indicators for SDGs, but also policy that would make those indicators become a reality within municipalities. So I don't know if you know, but we've got this guy from the Green Party stalking around here, and he's I don't think we've given him much in terms of concrete examples or policies to bring back to the Green Party yet, and that's a problem. And we need to give him more that he can bring back, because I don't know if he said that we could try them out. The Green Party they're not going to win the next election, the next major federal election. So there's some room there to try new things out, right? To be a little bit more innovative. So we have an opportunity here to give him some ideas. The next one is, so I said, oh, the thinks we can't think. And to me, it really needs to be, oh, the thinks we must think. So we are constrained by what we know and the situation that we're in, but we also already know what we know. I sound like Dr. Seuss. We can carry that with us by continuing to be vocal about our needs for social justice alongside environmental sustainability. We don't have to prioritize yet. We don't have to throw the baby, I won't say it because he might get But this means that we need to have a very clear vision of what maybe our 5 top EE values are. And there's a lot of people in this room working on that, and Clive Spash did some work on that, but we need to have a clear idea. So if it is going to be, for instance, feminism or gender equality is a clear value, therefore care work is central to what we do, because that is very important in terms of gender equality. So we need to come up with policies that therefore support that. So we need to have our values in line to have policies that support those values, right? And I just do want to take this moment to call out to Sophie, I don't know if she's in here, but for the free daycare that she's providing here. This is a huge step. I've had to skip entire conferences because I have a 3-year-old, and once they're past this stage, it's much more difficult to bring them to a conference. So, I mean, I know that there are people here taking advantage of that. So thank you, Sophie, for making that a reality for the women here and the parents here. The next is, so once we have these values that someone in this room is going to figure out for us, and once we have our new indicators, are you ready? He's okay. He fell back asleep. And once we have those indicators, and we know our policy on those pieces, we know what our education policy looks like as EE scholars that we want to encourage, we have all that figured out, then I argue that we need to start acting prefiguratively and live that way ourselves. So for me, my personal first step is that I've decided to leave academia once my postdoc is done. And to me, this is the most radical move I can make, the most EE decision I could possibly make at my current point in life. So that's what I'm going to do, and that's how I'm going to take back this sort of idea of care and feminism and say that it is my radical position, and then while I'm at home, also do community work and all of those good things. The next is to reinvigorate dailies for the common good. And so I've been trying to integrate this into some of the work that I do, and I know there's a lot of people here that agree with this statement. And that's a commitment and a focus. If you read that, there's a big commitment and a focus on community to help reinforce our identities and ideologies. Identities and ideologies are formed in networks of care. And I think sometimes we forget that, right? And this is the ontological basis for care. And it's only the freedom from others as individuals that promotes calculated self-interest and moral indifference. So if we come from a place of caring and concern, then citizens will keep that empathy alive, right? The last one that I have argued for in another session is to reintegrate systems thinking more concretely in ecological economic education in particular. So there's a group in here, the Leadership for the Ecozoic students just wrote a nice big paper on how we need to change education, and there's a lot of really good stuff in there, and one of the things that I would argue is that we need to have really good systems education. Because only then, when we make decisions and policy options, are we able, as ecological economists, to look at that through a systems perspective and see where we might see some of these wicked tensions come into play. And then we can be a little bit more prepared for it. But because systems are chaotic and have unintended consequences, we can't necessarily stop things from happening, but we can prepare ourselves for it a little bit, maybe. So I always like to end with some questions because, this topic, I feel like there's never really a lot of concrete answers. So what, if anything, do we need to rethink in order for low-growth economics to be our reality? And how intimately entangled are systems of social progress and environmental degradation? What kind of sustainability policies can we offer that help to retain our visions of social progress? And finally, if we do end up undermining the state by shifting towards more community, what do we lose? So I know that was the topic, and maybe I was supposed to answer these questions, but I don't have the answers. But what we might lose, it's probably more than just pineapples, but we can arm ourselves to defend the things that we hold most truly sacred by being a little bit more focused on those values and taking a more concerted effort at promoting our most core values through specific policy plans and our actions. Thanks.
Thanks, Katie. When Mario and Katie and I met to talk about this, we collectively decided that Mario would go first, and then I remembered that backwards, so thanks for being so willing to improvise. So now Mario Giampietro is going to talk about addressing the difficulty of accessing or guaranteeing the quality of scientific advice when dealing with these complex issues. And his face should appear on the big screen in a moment, and maybe his slides. Take it away, Mario.
Can you hear me? Ole? There is someone that can tell me whether... Hello?
We hear you.
Yes, perfect. Okay. First of all, I'm really sorry not to be able to be there because I Waterloo is my heart. I've been there a few times. When I was in Cornell, I was working with James Kay, and really, really, I'm sorry that I had another commitment. I'm in the Netherlands at the moment, in Den Haag. I decided not to discuss of why it's not possible to have a perpetual economic growth, why there is this policy legend of the decoupling of resources from economic growth, because I've been in ecological economics since the establishment of the society that was established in Barcelona, by the way. And really, I think that it's embarrassing that we are still uh, discussing whether or not the perpetual economic growth is possible. And I really loved the proposed title about tension and the transition, weak tensions. And I would like to share with you what we are learning in a big project that I am coordinating. Is a really a big project. It's almost 8 million euros, and about the implication of complexity for science. Okay, I will just give you a few examples of what are the implications of complexity that, in my view, are not taken seriously in the way that science is used for governance of sustainability. So one of the first challenge is due to the fact that we have a reality which can be observed across different scales, and then this imply a major epistemological challenge for the scientists willing to crunch number. Uh, on the bottom, you can see Mandelbrot, the father of fractal geometry, and he came out with the interesting point that even if you're measuring the length of something, this is not a fact, because you can have different measurements of the same things, uh, and and in a way that can be uh, certified by the use of the information. For instance, let's imagine that you are a captain of a large oil tanker going around UK, and you can say that the length is 2,800 kilometers, and you can prove it because you have a nautical chart, and then you can guess when you will get in a port. But if the same question is done to a bus driver, the bus driver will tell you that the length of the UK is 3,400 kilometers because he's driving the bus along the road of the coast, and he can calculate the cost of fuels, so he can uh, prove that is actually a different distance from what the oil tanker says. Let's imagine that you have a person walking on the coast, and I'm using as example Mont Saint-Michel that is in France, because I could not find a famous example of movement of the tide. But I mean, the point is that if you are walking around the coast, you cannot even define where the coast is, because depending on the time of the day, you may have a different definition of what the coast is. So what is this example saying? Is that you may have, in a discussion of sustainability, conflicting knowledge claims. And it really doesn't matter if these knowledge claims are validated because someone say is totally proved that this is the right length of the coastal line. Even if you're validating things for guiding action, still there are no facts. There are knowledge claims that can be useful for doing something. But if you have different actors doing different things at different scales, you no longer can rely on scientific evidence to avoid contestation of the numbers. Another example is about explanation. You may have a fact, a person that is dying, and you have an explanation. Why it is dying? Because it doesn't have oxygen in the brain. You may have another explanation, is because it's affected by lung cancer. Another explanation, because he has been a heavy smoker for all his life. Or you may have another explanation, humans must die. Of course, the last one is a scientific explanation as well. But even though science will not basically deal with it because it will imply reflectivity, that is not something that scientists like to do. only philosophers seem to be interested in that. Are these good explanation? It really depends on who is using this explanation. If a tax expert is using explanation oxygen in the supply, no oxygen supply in the brain, it would be completely ridiculous and irrelevant. Or for a doctor in an emergency room, the information that he was a heavy smoker is not an issue. But then if you are reshuffling the user of the explanation, maybe they are explanation that could be useful for the person. So second lesson is that narratives are neither true or false. Their useful depend on the nature of the concern making them relevant. Why you want to use that relevant narrative. So another example, and this is an example that it didn't make up, is really happened because I think that it would be impossible to make up this example. I was in a conference in Zurich about food security, and there were different speakers. So the first speaker say the key is to keep price of food commodity low. Then came another speaker that said that the key for food security was to keep price of food commodity high. Then, in relation to international policy, we had a speaker saying that we should reduce import from the south, and another speaker saying that we should increase the import from the south. Then we get social policy, in particular, this was a gender issue. So we get a speaker saying that we should preserve local cultural heritage, and another speaker saying that we should fight local cultural heritage. And what is important in this series of contrasting advice is that all these advice are perfectly defendable. The first one was a scientist from the International Food Policy Research Institute saying, if you want to protect the urban poor, then you really have to, maybe I have to take this out. Protecting the urban poor, you have to keep the price of commodity low. If you want to have farmers, they are expanding their production and having better standard of living, you have to keep the food commodity high. If you want to avoid the externalization of environmental impact from the north on the south, you should reduce the import. And a professor from Ghana was saying, if you want to develop the agricultural sector, leave the country in the south to use comparative advantage. In relation to the gender issue, well, Swiss feminists were making the point that we have to protect cultural diversity, which is an asset. So at that point, I mean, this type of argument cannot be attacked. But then we got the feminists from India then made the point that in her state, they were burning alive the wives with the dead husband. And of course, she had a very convincing point. What is the important point of these examples is that the salience of a scientific advice depend on the priority that the storyteller gives to a specific concern. If you are looking at an important aspect of this, all the scientists coming from the north were giving advice on how to stabilize the status quo, whereas all the scientists coming from the south were giving advice on how to change the existing situation as soon as possible. So this is another example that if you have a transition and you have a complex situation, you will have people that see different things, people that have different concern, and then the people that give different advice. Okay, so this is a slide that was the first time prepared in Waterloo. I was working with James Kay, and then it's very crowded, but I felt that I had to use it because for nostalgic reasons. So basically you have that if you're looking at social interaction, you have an information space that is open and expanding with continuous addition of meaning, storytellers, knowledge claims, aspiration on equivalent models. So this type of information space is too much for being handled in policy. So what happened is that in reality, when we are discussing of a policy, we cannot handle all these things at the same time. We have to do an epistemic boxing. That is, we are closing the information space, and we just identify what is the problem they want to tackle and what are the solutions. After this first simplification, you get a second simplification, depending on the type of technique that you are using to ranking possible options. You may have multi-criteria analysis, cost benefit, or target indicators decided by political negotiation. You carry out a second simplification that you just go to the best possible solution. However, the interesting part of the story that all the scientific discussion is about how to do the second simplification, whereas the real issue is how to do the first simplification, because whatever is relevant for sustainability, for social justice, for whatever, is how you go from the open information space to the epistemic box. And the quality check about the scientific evidence should be about you are using facts, or this is what you claim, but whose facts? Who decide that whose facts are these? You are defining problem, but whose problem are these? It's the same problem of sustainability experience in Sweden or in Switzerland are the same as a person living in a shanty town in South Africa, or someone still living in Haiti in collapsed buildings that still are not being rebuilt. So what is the issue here? That if at a certain point we do a quality check about the fact that this framing of scientific evidence has been carried out with a strong hegemonization of storytelling from powerful lobby or from powerful social actor, it should be important to go back and try to restart the process. So as a matter of fact, I am old, but I mean, this was something that was in the 90s suggested as soft system methodologies, that to have a sort of iteration through decompression, then re-expanding, recompress, expand, and trying to make as rich as possible the framing of what are the problems and what are the possible solutions. So this is more or less what we are trying to do in the MAGIC project. And the message is that if we are dealing with sustainability, and in particular in the nexus in which you want to look at the same time the consequence, the entanglement between water, energy, food, land use, and human activity use, you have to have two quality checks. One on the scientific analysis, forget about reductionism. I mean, we cannot handle this type of problem with reductionism. You will have different scales at different dimensions, the example of the coastal line of UK. You will have numbers that means different things when used for different purposes. You will always have to handle in predicative relation, that you cannot just change the thing and you assume you are just changing a simple and other things in another way with the direct causality. Always, if you change something, everything else changes. There are not ceteris paribus assumption. So we have to learn how to do contingent analysis. And what does it mean this in relation to ecological economics? That we have to develop an alternative to the use of economic narrative in the framing of sustainability issue. I mean, I've been into this business for too long. It's time that I retire. But I mean, if you are using such a simple representation of the world, like as done by neoclassical economics, you will never have enough information to do an informed discussion about how to handle the sustainability of our society or humankind in general. There is no way that, with GDP, willingness to pay, and all the other things, you can address the set of problems that we are dealing with, especially when coming with the nexus and biophysical aspect and sustainability aspect. But there is another aspect which is very important, is about scientific advice. We should stop the Cartesian dream that we can predict, control, make plan, decide what is good, what is bad, ranking in an uncontested way. If you have policy discussion about sustainability, you will never have facts. They will be always contested for two reasons. One, because it's a heavy dose of uncertainty. And second, because there are legitimate contrasting storytelling. And if you eliminate uncertainty by hegemonizing the perspective of someone, is not fair. So the framing of the issue, deciding what is the problem, is already a political decision, and this has to be scrutinized in terms of equity and fairness. Who is deciding that this is the problem of sustainability? I don't want to say that because this will be, in general, I get in trouble when I say that. But the fact that we are all hysteric about climate change, like if this is the only problem of sustainability we have, I'm not saying that it's not a problem. What I'm saying that there are a lot of other problems, like the total collapse of the social fabric all over this planet, that should be addressed as a complex of problem and not just look at one that doesn't have blood, doesn't have shit, doesn't have unpleasant things, because the climate change is something out in the sky. But the climate change is just one of the aspects of a global problem of sustainability that we have. And to get out of this, we have to start looking at being more reflexive. If you want to discuss about sustainability, you have to decide what we want to sustain, for how long, who will pay, and then the point is, who is us? That is not that trivial. It's they are Canadian, they are women, there are Talibans. The Taliban is us, or I don't know, terrorists are us, or humankind, Gaia is us. And then, depending on how you respond to this, you will get a totally different framing of the issue of sustainability. So, what is the problem here? That we have to address explicitly, because this is something that I am a quantitative scientist. I like crunching number. I do multi-scale modeling and things. But I mean, I at a certain point when I became old, I realized that crunching number is not enough. You have to uh, guarantee that there is quality in the process of production and use of scientific advice, that there is no hegemonization in the framing of the issue, in the definition of indicator. This is something that later on maybe we can discuss about the sustainable development goal that is fascinating, who decide the priority among the goal in the case that you have a trade-off, because you want to save the world with 65 different targets that they are contrasting with each other. Per se is not a very good plan unless we have a way of defining winner, loser, and what are the trade-off by implementing the target 6 of the sustainable development 15 versus the target 8 of the sustainable development 12. Just throw it there and everyone pick up the sustainable goal that you like most is very dangerous. You may have a company mining in a valley in Chile, destroying a valley, and then they say that they do it for increasing the GDP of the area. Another important point is that you cannot developing alternative to the use of economic narrative if you do not start questioning the quality of the process of production and use of scientific information, and vice versa. So this is my last slide. Again, this is something that is still a legacy of my period in Waterloo. This is the work with James and Nils Rolling. The political process of governance is about mixing concern, aspiration, narrative models, non-equivalent knowledge claims of decision makers, social actors, scientists, and that they have to deliberate on what are the priority to be given to the concern and goals, and what is the best way of framing the policy issue. So what is the problem? What is the solution? And what is important is that this process has to be based on reflexivity and anticipation. For this reason, it would be important to have a permanent contact among these actors, because they have to understand each other and be capable of changing their own definition of concern, aspiration, narrative. In a way, this is a little bit obtained by the democratic process when you, the social actor, vote politician in office. But still, it is important that the institution that where the decision maker are operating are transparent, are capable of interacting with the society as much as possible. And one important point is that this type of interaction should be done, like for instance, this was an idea needs rolling, uh, using permanent platform operating across acute conflict. When you have a conflict, it is very difficult to have all this exchange of idea or understand the other perspective or concern, because when you have a conflict, you are just trying to it's not possible to uh, uh, see the root of the contested issues. What it would be much better if this type of reflexivity and anticipation of possible trouble would be done in a permanent base. So I think, especially at the local level, for an area like Waterloo, a level of a province, this would be much better. Of course, if you want to do this at the level of the world, would be much more difficult. I believe that that's it. This is the ideas I wanted to share with you, and I think that I will be happy to discuss this.
Thanks, Mario. That was super fascinating. I want to remind everyone to write down their questions and pass them up so I can have some questions to read and don't have to come up with them all myself.
It's not the most baby-friendly chair. We'll manage.
Mario, you can see us fine?
Yeah, yeah.
Great. Okay, so I will start with one question. All this complexity and uncertainty and the difficulty of being sure that we know anything gives us pause and makes us hesitate as scientists, hopefully. Hopefully in a way that's constructive. But at the same time, the environmental crises we're facing are super urgent, and the timescales needed to act are really short, in that days of inaction make a big material difference in terms of human lives in the future, perhaps. And at the same time, the construction of urgency has been a real big source of oppression and white supremacy, as we know, in the past. And so I'm wondering, the two panelists, how do we as scientists balance the pause we need and the humility that we need to have facing complexity with the short timescales on which we need to be acting, and we're, as scientists, need to give this advice?
I'll go first if that's okay. So when Sam and I were driving home last summer from somewhere, I said something about becoming an eco-modernist because I had children. And Sam looked at me and he went, oh. And that was our first moment of like, wow, we need to talk a bit more. And and yesterday I started expressing that to some people around, and Peter Victor overheard that, and he said something that has, in about 30 seconds, he'd completely changed my mind. And it really speaks to this, that the best thing we can do is make sure we have happy children. And that's because happy children will be more resilient to unpredictable futures. And to me, that really cuts to the core of your question and deals with a lot of the problems that I actually just talked about. So that's a very simple answer to a complex question, but I'm going to stick with it.
Okay. If you want my answer is that, as a matter of fact, to me, this is one of the most problematic aspects, the way they are selling the sustainability problem. In the sense, there is an enormous urgency. So we need to do a war, climate change, a war. As soon as you're doing wars, you are giving a white check to banks and transnational corporations, because the real issue, we are told that yes, we have all the technology, we have all the things that we need, it's just a matter of political will. And what will be this political will? To give much, much more money to the banks and to those developing this fantastic technology to solve all our problems. First of all, this is what we do in Magic. At the moment, there are no solution, technical solution to our problems, but not even close, not a little bit. And keeping this story that we have all the solution, yes, we can, is extremely dangerous, because if you say there is no problem and then there are problems, then you start blaming someone. No, we cannot do it because of the Chinese, because of the Jews, because of the black, and this is a recipe for war in the sense. What we should say much more honestly is that we have a problem. Rather than yes, we can move to Houston, we have a problem. Let's sit down and start discussing the fact that the actual combination of economic activity and social practice is not sustainable, and there is no way that we can keep it for another 20 years, not centuries, 20 years. And then if there is urgency, then I would rather go for a war, go for a revolution. I would prefer much better the world revolution, a war. The sense that if you have 1% of the population that has more money than 99% of the population, at a certain point, the person to be blamed are the 99%, not the 1%. The 1% does what he tried to do. And the problem is that us, the 99%, are making possible for them to get all this power. So I believe that I understand that I can sound an old cranky, nostalgic. But I believe that we arrive to a point that we have to stand up and say, guys, it is not about having more technology. It's about changing the way the society is operated. Because to me, it's like official storytelling is totally implausible. It's irresponsible and it's ungovernable. Look what happened. If you keep pretending that there is no problem, you get Trump, Salvini, Le Pen, Brexit, whatever. And this is not because of populism or because suddenly all the people became crazy. Simply because the official storytelling is not plausible. And since it's not plausible, nobody believed the story, became ungovernable. And I don't know if this is.
Thanks. All right, then the next question is for Katie. And is it worth scaling up maker economies across Canada? What would be the benefits, challenges, potential allies, alliances, and work for people in this room to support this goal?
Is it worth it? Yeah, it's worth it. I think, I mean, making is a totally different kind of form of production, right? It undermines the dominant form of production that we have now. And when I started, 3D printing was just beginning to come out, but it hasn't really taken off yet, like it's not in the household. But I had an experience where I went to the Guelph Public Library for their free 3D printing night, and they fixed something on a fan that had broken in about half an hour that the corporation had told me was not fixable, and that I would need to purchase a new fan. And so this, like, in about half an hour, they had undermined that whole process of production. And so to me, that really highlighted how powerful maker culture can be. Now, the problem with scaling maker culture up is that maker culture seems to be very locationally dependent, as with many things. I mean, Meg mentioned this in her presentation yesterday in the Radical EE agenda, that there's so much diversity that to scale anything up becomes very, very difficult when in our work, it seems, because different people need it in different ways, right? So what a maker in Toronto would be very different to what a maker might need in Northern Ontario or in the Northwest Territories or something, right? But the underlying sort of what municipalities can do is give the space, create maker spaces. And even just maker spaces, they do a number of things. They give you a spot to go and fix something if you need it or if it's broken, to make something if you would like to contribute to production. And it also gives a community. A lot of the people in the cities said that they would often go to the makerspace to just hang out because it was a community-orienting experience. Same with a lot of the maker events that happen in Kitchener. It's a very, very strong community. Community is a common theme in maker research. And so for that, again, for that reason alone, if we prioritize community, what better than a makerspace, because it not only does it undermine this larger system, this larger capitalist production system, but it also promotes community. And that's, I think, something definitely worth scaling to different areas of Canada. And I mean, what can you do? I mean, open a makerspace. Go and open one, become a member of one. There is a membership fee very often because they have to have a fee to exist to pay the rent. So become a member, even if you don't use it very often and you just go sometimes. Or go to maker events. Events, if a library is holding maker nights, they're only going to continue to hold them as often as people are showing up. So just everyone in here has something in their house that's broken or has a hole in it. If you take it to a maker night, they're going to fix it for you. So go find something broken and bring it to a maker, and you're helping that culture stay alive in Canada. And why not? I mean, we should be doing that instead of buying new anyway.
Might teach you how to fix it too.
Yeah, they'll teach you. Yeah. Oh, that's a good point. Mentorship is also key in these places. They will teach you how to fix it. They'll teach you how to, we did one with children. We did a maker event with children, and it was amazing because all of a sudden you would see 6-year-olds using power tools. And I wasn't a parent yet, but if I was, I would have been paralyzed with fear. But at the time I was like, this is so cool to see a 6-year-old using that power saw. But they can do it. They can do it with some supervision. And so if they can learn, we can learn. And makers are always happy to teach you how to use a power tool. And it's empowering also. It feels very cool to use a power tool.
So this question was addressed to Katie, but I think it's a question that can be posed to both of our panelists. Someone wrote that, I find this low growth framing problematic, particularly when it's purposely confounded and confused with degrowth, which implies a radical transformation of our economies, not sluggish or low growth. So can you explain what you mean by low growth and the connections to degrowth? And I'll expand it so that both panelists can address it more generally. What's your position on degrowth? I know you've both written papers that are sort of a critique of degrowth, but it seemed like a friendly critique of some of the assumptions behind degrowth. At least this is how I interpret it, so I'd love to hear your opinions.
Sure. I mean, I often use them interchangeably, and that's something that I get every time I submit a paper. That's usually the first comment from a reviewer, is that I'm using all of these D, low, and no growth, or A growth less often, interchangeably. And that obviously has problems because they're totally different. So as far as, I mean, I don't have a problem with any of the major positions of degrowth. I don't know enough about it, to be honest, to have a problem with it. When I was first taught about ecological economics, I was taught by Peter Victor, and so this idea of a low-growth economy is, in my mind, potentially more preferable because, more things can exist longer in that situation, right? Potentially. But that's the other thing I've learned in the 4 years of my PhD is to use the word potentially a lot, and possibly, and I don't know, and we'll see. Because because when it is, I mean, that's the problem with what we're talking about here, is that we just don't know whether it's going to be degrowth or low growth, or, I mean, the problem of justice is a problem because of capitalism, and we want to combat that, but also keeping it, I'm not saying that therefore, we should not try or whatever. Like, that's not the point that I'm trying to make, and that's a criticism I often get. We need to try, because the system right now is unjust. So whether that is D or low or no or A growth, whatever is going to work, I'm going to support, but I just want people to stop for a moment and make sure that they're considering what they might lose, what those unintended consequences are, and to recognize that we don't know. There are examples in history of communities that have a good relationship with nature and have maintained positive social progress, and there are examples in history of low growth or degrowth or no growth economies that had horrible social progress. So we don't know where it'll go. I hope that we can hang on to it and have it in the future, and that's why I'm saying we need to keep it in our minds to do so. But that's the only position I will take on it, is none. So.
Mario?
You are really put me on the spot. You know that Giorgos Kallis, who was here yesterday there, is my neighbor. Adicta. Look, personally, I never liked the growth label, because it is imagining that if you don't do anything, we will keep growing, which is absolutely not true. To my perspective is that we reached the limit of the resources. Now we are still going because we are printing money. Every country on this world are printing trillions per year. So basically, we are still capable of getting off resources from poor country, abusing the saving of poor people of this planet that believe that our printed money is real money. So I don't think that we will keep growing in biophysical terms for more than another 20, 30 years, because if you're looking at the structural element, there are a few countries in very good shape. Canada is one of them. You have plenty of energy, plenty of land, plenty of water. You told about fantastic countries. A country is Canada, but a lot of countries are in deep trouble. So I would prefer personally neither grow or degrow. I will go for the post-grow, start doing something else. Because the way the society is organized at the moment, the capitalist system, is always forced to produce surplus. If you don't produce surplus, you cannot pay the debt, and then the system start getting in trouble. Personally, what I think is that we would need a radical change of the way we are organizing our society. Nobody knows how to do it, so we will be forced by what happened to adjust. But it will be nice to be prepared to the fact that we will have to adjust, not to pretend that everything is under control and it's just because of some idiots here and there they are disturbing the big plan of techno innovation that that will be the solution. So I personally, I believe that we should stop to discuss about growth altogether, either for growing or for the growing. It's time to do something else. That's it. This is my opinion.
Yeah. Right, and I agree with that completely. Peter, I mean, last night he was showing that there's other things we can measure to see those increase rather than growth, right? And so maybe instead of talking about low or degrowth, I should start saying post-growth as well, because I would much rather see happiness and these other sorts of indicators, you know, relationship with biosphere, these sorts of things increase over time rather than this growth.
Yeah, but I mean, we should stop basing the framing of our discussion of our future based on economic narratives. The economic narratives are not capable of addressing the 80-90% of relevant aspects of our life. They don't see nature, they don't see Gaia, they don't see inequity, they don't see what is relevant for us. Economic narratives as a cybernetic control. They don't care. So if I have to kill you, they say, I'm sorry, it's my fault, it's the market. So you have to go out of the market, you have to get out of your house, you have to get out. It's not nobody's fault, it's the market. We do not want to be regulated by cybernetic control. We want to be in charge of our decision. So we should stop to use economic narrative for discussing on sustainability. If you do that, the discussion about growth and the growth is completely irrelevant. This is why I have been against the growth, not because I am against the idea. I don't like the adoption, the endorsement of economic narrative to discuss and to say that we should do something different.
Thanks. I think that's a wonderful note to end on, especially because I believe most degrowth advocates would agree that we want to decenter economic narratives. So thank you, Mario, and
Thank you.
Katie, and Logan. Everyone give it up for them one more time.
Thanks, Sam.
And I
Okay, so can I switch off? Yes, okay.
And I want to make a plug for, if this was interesting to you, there's 2 of the special sessions coming up this afternoon that are related to complexity and system science. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam.